Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 33 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening! All this speculation, uncertainty, and worry was making Janir's head hurt. Rubbing her temples, she shuffled out of the stables, tripping over a calico cat in the middle of the aisle. The cat hissed indignantly and swiped a paw in Janir's direction. Ignoring the self-righteous feline, Janir made her way to the castle entry and the foot of a narrow staircase. As she passed through the second level on the way to her rooms, a rustling came from her left.
Psst! Janir! Over here!
The girl wearily turned her head and saw exactly the one she had been expecting, his red head peering out from behind the thick door leading out onto a balcony. "What do you want, Carlisle?" It might not have been fair to blame him. She was the one who kept letting herself get dragged along. But she wasn't in a particularly forgiving mood. Carlisle wordlessly beckoned. Sighing, Janir followed him. As she emerged onto the balcony, the enchanter waited at the far end of the stonework, leaning against the rail and circling the balcony. From here they had a view of most of the castle courtyard. The peasants were moving their animals into the castle for the night early, as Armandius had doubtless commanded them to do. They didn't yet know they could be in danger, and that was probably for the best. No need to incite panic just yet. Carlisle kept his back turned to her, head tilted to the sky, and hands folded behind his back.
"This new development is most grave indeed. My suspicions have been confirmed. The dwarves are aiding the Slavish in their war against us."
"Yes, you were right. Just as you were right about the Argatolums and the Key of Amatons," Janir conceded, ignoring the little bite to her pride. "I know you're going to tell me anyway, but what do you make of it?"
We need to discover why the dwarves are allied with the Slavish. That could be the answer to this entire riddle.
"Are you going to talk like a general all day?" She folded her arms across her chest. "And how do you intend to get secrets out of a dwarf? You might be strong-willed, but I don't think that even you are a match for one of them."
Carlisle shrugged. "No idea. But I'll fight one with my bare hands if I have to. Don't let the scrawny look fool you. My hands are very strong."
Janir looked down at her own hands, feminine hands with slim wrists and long fingers. They certainly didn't look as if they could have wrung a man's neck, but they had. The first man she had killed was trying to murder Armandius. He had deserved what he got. She had no doubts about that, and she didn't regret having done it, but still, it was a bitter memory. A flash of motion caught her eye. Janir jumped. "Saoven, don't do that." The elf cocked his head, rather playfully for someone over 70 years old. "Do what?" "Just appear from nowhere. It's very unsettling." "My apologies." Saoven wore the hints of a smile. "Force of habit." He was outfitted in a suit of armor. Not the heavy armor made up of metal plates that Brevian knights wore, but a lighter, more flexible armor made of leather reinforced with woven steel. "Are you about to go and scout?" The words seemed to stumble out her lips. "Yes," Saoven said with no clear emotion. He seemed about to add something when Carlisle shoved his way between them, pretending to contemplate the people below. "What was that?" Janir asked sharply.
"What was what?"
Carlisle leaned backward, using his head to block her view of Saoven. "Childish. So childish." Janir glared unkind thoughts toward the enchanter and leaned forward to see around him. "When will you be leaving?" she asked Saoven. "Immediately, and I will not have a chance to speak to you after I return. Armandius plans to attack at first light." If we wait much longer, the Slavish will be able to bring reinforcements. Janir swallowed. She shouldn't have been surprised. One of Armandius's favorite sayings was, "Be first with the most." It meant one should always overpower and crush the enemy before they had the chance to prepare. There were about 90 able-bodied fighters in the castle, around 120 if Armandius and the Queen's Knights were counted. Janir guessed Armandius would leave behind a handful to guard the castle, and take the rest with him. She heard he'd done something similar during wartime. From what she had seen, that would be enough to overpower the Slavish along the Crichton Road. Still, has he sent for reinforcements from Virida? Surely they can spare a few hundred men. Armandius has done just that, but he fears the enemy becoming entrenched. It would be nigh unto impossible to dig them out should that happen. Janir didn't know what to say. Her tongue burned with 100 thoughts, but not one could get past her lips. "It will be all right, Janir," Saoven promised, his voice softening. "I know," she said, even if she didn't believe it and wanted Armandius to stay here, safe. Even if she did feel a tumult of fear for Saoven, about to venture out alone. Carl leaned forward again. Janir strode around Carl before she punched him. Once she was facing the elf, awkwardness overcame her. I wish you well." Saoven stepped toward her. "Will you be mad with worry while Armandius and I are gone?" Janir couldn't even smile back. "You have no idea." The corners of Saoven's mouth twitched. "Do not take this wrong, but that makes me very—" Carl suddenly flung his arms around Saoven's waist and squeezed him in a hearty hug.
"Oh, Goblin, do be sure to come back safely. I don't know what I would do without you."
Saoven arched one brow. "Luring me into a sense of safety before you sink a blade between my ribs?"
"No, I just promise you'll come back unharmed."
Saoven shoved Carl away. "What is wrong with you?"
"I just really care about you,"
Carl exclaimed. "I have to be going now," Saoven apologized to Janir. "Will you walk with me to the door, since Carl wants to stay here?" The enchanter blustered.
"I never said that I wanted to."
"Stay here," the elf coldly repeated. Janir followed him, and he paused at the threshold of the balcony. "Janir," he faltered, as if trying to decide what to say. "I want you to have this." He pulled a stone no larger than a walnut from his pocket. It glowed soft blue, covered in an intricate web of thin wires securing it to a delicate silver chain. Janir didn't recall ever seeing anything like it. By the look of it, it was expressly elvish, and as a result it must be exceptionally valuable. She shook her head. "No, Saoven, I can't." "Do you remember some months ago, when I said that I could not sense you at all when I was looking for you? That I had to search for your horse instead?" "Yes." That had been before he knew she was an Argotolum. "It is because many of elves' abilities come from the innate magic woven into our being. It is much less potent than the magic of an enchanter or a clairvoyant, but the magic nonetheless. I want you to have this, Janir, because so long as you keep it with you, I will always be able to find you, no matter where you are." Saoven extended the stone to her again, his voice dropping to a whispered plea. "Take it." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, and I will not stop telling you to take it until you do. Take it, take it, take it." Janir couldn't help but offer a smile, even if it was a nervous and tentative one. She grasped the silver chain and slipped it over her head. "It's lovely. Thank you. What is it called?" "I shall tell you later. Conceal it, especially from the enchanter. He is liable to try poking at it." "Is it dangerous?" Janir could sense the power inside, but it seemed malleable, soft. It was a pale blue light that matched the physical glow, gentle and welcoming. "Only to enchanters who refuse to mind their own business," the elf replied. Carlyle wailed from the balcony, clutching his hands to his chest.
"Oh, Goblin, do be safe. My heart would crack like an eggshell, and rivers would flow from my eyes if you returned with so much as a scratch on your flawless fingertip."
Janir clenched her teeth. "I don't know what's gotten into him." "I believe I do," Saoven sighed. "What?" The elf didn't answer. He briefly touched her shoulder, and then he was gone. "What is wrong with you?" Janir demanded, whirling on the enchanter. "Why are you acting like a lunatic all of a sudden?"
"Well, it worked, didn't it?" Carlyle shrugged. "He left."
"He's about to risk his life for us."
"Like you and I weren't doing that while he was out hawking," the enchanter quipped.
Cursing with a most unladylike fervor, Janir left before she hit him. Just as Saoven had said, Armandius had his soldiers move out when it was still night outside. Though her foster father came and said goodbye to her late that night, it still felt abrupt. The clank of armor and the snorting of horses woke her a few hours before the dawn. From her window she watched them leave. Under the bleak sheet of darkness, the soldiers looked like so many steel scales of a narrow serpent as they snaked their way out of the gates and toward the mountains, where they would meet. Janir wasn't sure. The Slavish would have probably reinforced the defenses of the road since being discovered. But how many men would be at the disposal of the Slavish under the circumstances? Janir spotted Armandius's dappled gray destrier, leading the way with her foster father, unrecognizable in his full battle armor. She briefly glimpsed a white mare and her rider, but lost sight of them before she could tell if it was Saoven. She watched until the only sign of the men was specks of light from their torches flickering in the distance. With a sigh, she paced back to her bed and clambered under the blankets. Armandius had spent time away before, yes, but never to go to war. She had seen Saoven in danger, yes, but she had been there. She had known what was happening. Rolling onto her side, Janir kneaded the hem of her nightgown's sleeve in her fingers. She had no desire to be involved in fighting, but wouldn't it be better to be there, to know what was happening, even if it would give her nightmares for the rest of her life? Maybe it was some Argotolem instinct that made her feel that way. The Argotolems were a race brought into existence for the purpose of magical warfare. It was the norm among Argotolems for women to do battle. Women were trained for it alongside men, but Armandius would sooner die than see her in armor, and had once said as much. Her foster father believed war was no place for women, and Janir understood why. But she wasn't yet sure what was her own conviction. Janir couldn't think of a woman she had met who would have been suitable for fighting, and wasn't sure she wanted to meet one. Either way, none of that helped her now. Desperate prayers formed on her lips in rapid succession. Silently whispered to the sky. She had no doubts that both Armandius and Saoven could take care of themselves, but still, staying behind was torture. She would only know what was happening to Armandius or Saoven if one of them died. She had felt it when her mother had died nearly 8 years ago. A tearing, ripping pain that left her drained and exhausted. She had no doubt she would sense it if something happened to Armandius. And Saoven? She knew she cared about Saoven, but she colored at the idea. He had risked himself for her several times. She had been willing to face danger for his sake, but did he care for her that way? On the other hand, did it matter? Saoven was an elf, and he could choose his bride from one of the fair elf maidens who were rumored to be beautiful beyond the lot of mortals. If he thought she had fallen for him, what would he do? He would probably leave, or at least stay away from her until she snapped out of it. Janir thought perhaps moving would help her relax and go back to sleep. It would still be a few hours before the Brevians would meet the Slavish, a few hours until dawn. She paced the length of her room, then turned back and paced the opposite direction, reached the wall, and repeated the procedure. It really wasn't surprising that she had fallen for the elf. After all, he was a good man. He was brave, compassionate, wise, and... "Oh, stop it!" Janir shouted to herself, shaking her head as if to shake the thought loose. You're acting like one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting. You're being ridiculous. Janir had found that saying that something was foolish often helped her think it was. However, this time it didn't work so well. You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.